All right, well, when we booked this session several weeks ago, we didn't quite anticipate the context in which we'd be having this conversation. And I'm going to save a question about the moment we're living in right now until later, and it's probably an unfair question you can't even answer, so just wait for that.
Okay.
But what I do want to do, since this is a day dedicated to first-time filmmaking, each of you had some experience making films, but this was definitely a big step up from anything you had done before. And I kind of want to go through, 5 steps of the process and just, ask you what you took away, what you learned in this experience. Okay? Starting with financing a film, what was a takeaway that you had about financing a documentary?
Sure. So we did this independently with a combination of grants and equity investments. Early on in the process, Josh and I, is my mic working? Yes? Okay, sorry. And early on when we got the access to film with Anthony, we actually did not have funding at that moment, but we felt that we had an extraordinary story and we wanted to film it. And we believed that if we continued with the story, funding would come. And that was this leap of faith that we took because we really believed in the story, and we really believed that if we could get it together and continue moving the project forward, we would get the funding.
And can I ask how long that did take, and how much into filming, and what you have to show people to flick the switch?
Yeah, we started, it was basically 3 years from the moment we started filming to the release of the film was about 3 years. And so, we filmed, the 4 months of the election, all day, every day, nonstop, really with no financing in place, and then spent much of the following year after we sort of finished collecting our footage, putting together pitch reels and figuring out where the money would come from. And we did, we considered possibly going, looking for a network partner or something like that. And ultimately, I think in retrospect, we were really happy to have the independence that we ended up having, with the independent financing, where it really was, we really were the only voices in the room creatively to determine how we wanted to put the film together.
We also got an executive producer, Motto Pictures, Julie Goldman and Christopher Clemens and Carolyn Hepburn, and they came on early after we had for a year after we were had filmed the film, filmed the movie, and they helped us in terms of thinking about strategies for grant making and getting investors. They guided us through that process, which was really helpful.
And I think Julie Goldman, Deborah, am I right that she's going to be on a panel later on this week? Offhand?
Producing day.
On producing day, so you can hear from her. All right, let's move on to my second question. I want to ask what you learned about interacting with your subjects and negotiating your access, which is so incredible in this film.
Yeah, it was a dynamic throughout filming of figuring out when to push and when to sort of hang back, and that was something that we navigated throughout the whole thing. When Anthony granted us access, the understanding, of course, was that if ever they didn't want us to be in the room or to leave the room or turn off the camera, we would respect those boundaries, and you can see some of those moments in the film itself. But it's one of those sort of intangible sort of things that I guess is kind of ultimately ends up being about instinct, about sort of, after long days on the campaign trail, long difficult days, there were times when most of the filming I was alone with him, and there were times when, I knew that he didn't want to talk, and I should sort of hang back, and there were other times when I thought he might be open to some prodding and questioning, and it was a fascinating dynamic to sort of work throughout.
My next question is related, and that's about what you learned about shooting. And you've talked about kind of having an idea of when to turn on the camera and when to turn it off, but visualizing this film, like, knowing when you were going in for a close-up, or knowing when you want a 2-shot or a wide shot, what were some of the lessons that you learned about that?
It's a great question. One of the funny things about the way this film came together is that when we started, we had a shooter, and so there were a couple of people in the room for really a couple days, and then we realized very quickly that there just wasn't room for that many people, and it had to be one person. The person probably should be me in this case. But I had not that much experience shooting, and so our editor liked to joke that the footage got demonstrably less better throughout the course of the 400 hours of shooting that we did. But yeah, I mean, I guess to answer the question, I think that there was. One of the things about the film is there's a lot that's said through the facial expressions, especially of Huma, and a lot of actually in some ways the quieter moments speak the loudest, I think, in the film, and it really a lot of that came through sort of figuring out where to point the camera, and what to be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, Josh and I were talking throughout the process, and we started to figure out when were the moments that we had to be there, because there were these long days, and what we realized, it was the in-between spaces. It was after a campaign event, when he was driving home in the car, just when he got in the office, in the elevator, like in between the spaces, that's where we needed to be. So it was always like, okay, maybe you could rest in between for a policy speech, but after that, needed to be there.
Yeah, it's funny, in my experience filming people making speeches, you never use that stuff, or you maybe use a little bit of it just to kind of establish it, but you can shoot hours and hours of someone behind a podium.
Yeah, and in this case, I mean, I think we both really felt like we had to keep shooting, because like even in the car, I mean, there are hours and hours of footage of just sitting in the back seat with him in the car, driving around to events all over the city where nothing's happening, but then, he would say something or have an interaction with his staff that was totally unpredictable, and if you're not shooting the whole time, you can't catch that stuff.
So let me ask about editing. How much material did you walk into the edit room with, and what were the discoveries you made there?
So we had about 400 hours of footage. And what we did have, which was great, is that before our editor, an incredible editor named Elyse came on board, we had about a year to really look through our footage. And we screened everything, and we created this crazy log that Josh got an amazing system where you could just type in a few words and everything would come up in terms of different scenes. So we knew our material, and we actually started editing a lot of the scenes before Eli came on board. So when he did, our edit was just 9 months.
And so what were you giving him? Were you giving him like a 4-hour assembly?
No, that's where I think that year was really beneficial. We were giving him scenes that we thought, and we had a sense of where it was going to go, but we were just giving him scenes, and there was no. What was our rough cut? Our rough cuts. We had like.
Yeah, I mean, Eli has a fascinating way of working. A lot of editors will edit long, and then you cut down, and Eli and us together, we really sort of ended up focusing in on the important sort of moment and then building out. So I don't know that our rough cut was ever longer than like 100 minutes,
Yeah.
basically, and the final was 90 minutes long.
But I think it was because we really knew our material.
And along the way, I'm curious how, excuse me, you were working out the tone of the piece, because there's a way in which this can be a comedy, there's a way in which it can be a tragedy, there's a way in which you can feel sympathy for the people involved or feel incredible scorn for the people involved. What was that process like?
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely one of the main thrusts of our effort here was trying to figure out how to capture a tone that really conveyed, as you said, just this incredibly wide range of feeling and emotion. I mean, it is on some level a very tragic story, and there's also these elements of absurdity and even comedy. And we wanted to make sure that we could sort of capture that full range, which it was a process of going back and forth and sort of taking a step back at various points and figuring out if it is hitting the right tone.
That's right. The other thing was, I mean, it was really important for us that it had some sense of irony and satire, but also heart. And that was that balance in music and in editing was key to us. And one of the reasons, and we tell the story, we looked for 150 editors. I have a huge Excel spreadsheet. And when we wrote Eli, it was like he had that humor. And we felt that pace that we needed for the film.
Now, finally, let me ask you about distribution. I can remember when the film premiered at Sundance Film Festival, came in Sundance without a distributor, you were looking for a distributor. There were people talking about the film saying, well, could this film really play outside New York City? Can this film play during an election year? All kinds of prognosticating that kind of shows you how no one really knows anything in the distribution business. It's easy to say in retrospect that after this film's success this year, but it definitely was not that clear to see it in January. So I wonder, for you as filmmakers, when this film, Your Baby, gets passed over to a distributor, in this case Sundance Selects, what did you learn about that process and how you had to be involved?
I think the real key for us was really trying, and in this case, I think being very happy that it worked in this way, of finding a partner who really understood the story beyond kind of in this case, this story beyond just the sort of sensational elements of it. I think we understood there was the risk that this would fall into just being kind of more of the same sensational sort of fodder with Weiner's story and his scandal, and we were really happy to find partners at IFC and Showtime who understood that there was more to this story than that, and who were willing to really include us in the process of figuring out how to talk about it, and the marketing materials and the framing of the story that really did justice to what we were trying to get at beyond just Anthony Weiner's story.
That's exactly right. I mean, we hired Josh Braun as our sales agent, and we had other distributors that were interested, but the people that we went with, IFC and Showtime, they really seemed to understand what was important to us. And there was this risk with our film that it could just fall into sensational headlines, and they understood that, and it really mattered to us, and it ended up being just like an amazing partnership. I was telling you, coming here to Doc NYC, I was like, what are we going to talk about? And the feeling of gratitude that I get to be in the doc community, like I feel that way. We feel that way. We talked after, like, we want to make a film, and films can matter, and stories can matter, and we can do something that can resonate and help, I don't know, reveal where we are in our culture and our media, ourselves. So I feel grateful that I'm in this doc community, and I want to continue to make stories, and I think that some elements of our film can resonate right now. Yeah.
This is a day dedicated to first-time documentary making, and in your case, you achieved what would be the wildest dreams of most people setting out to make their first film, in terms of the recognition and really artistic accomplishment of your film. Now that you have that behind you, what do you see as the challenges or opportunities of making your next film?
It's a great question. I mean, we're in this moment now of really trying to kind of answer that question. We're really excited. We've been working together for 5 years now, and we're really excited to move on to tell more stories. As Elyse was saying, I mean, it is an incredible privilege to be in this place where we have opportunities to tell these kinds of stories, and we're excited to do that.
I also think, we are developing our next couple of projects, and we're not yet in production. So at the moment, it feels like we do have this moment right now where we can focus on a story that can be relevant for the next couple of years and really speak to what's happening.
How many people here have not yet seen Weiner? Well, we have a screening at Doc NYC. Deborah, do you have a handy, or do you guys know when your screening is? No. Well, it's in the guide. It's part of our shortlist section where we pick 15 films from the year that we think are real standouts. So there will be a screening where Josh and Elyse will be at. That's going to wrap up this morning Manifesto. We're going to quickly turn our stage around to jump into our next panel. And to introduce that, I'm gonna bring up Deborah Rudolph. Deborah has been the producer of DocMIC Pro in our panels for the last 3 years. She's done an incredible job this year, as you're going to see if you stick around these next 8 days, of putting together a great speakers list. It's really tightly curated. So I want to thank Deborah Rudolph and welcome Deborah Rudolph. And thanks to Josh Kriegman and Elyse Steinberg.
Thank you, and thank you, Showtime.